Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream on the Adopt and Embrace YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Woods, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you, except hopefully the sound's coming through now. Looks like it might not be coming through. Let me check. All right, I can see some sound coming through, so that's good. All right, excellent. Welcome to the YouTube channel today. We're going to do more of our live read of Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, a manager's guide to communication, collaboration, and coordination with Microsoft Teams. But before we get into the read of the book today, there's some pretty exciting news to share in terms of some stuff that's come out with the Microsoft Ignite conference that's on at the moment. The Microsoft's made some really awesome announcements. And one in particular that we're really excited about is Teams Connect and the ability to share channels with people inside your organization or outside of your organization as well. And which is going to be an incredible bit of capability that's coming this year in Microsoft Teams. And it'll have an impact on some of the stuff that we talked about in the last live stream, particularly around people and priorities and the role that channels play within your team designs as well. So if you want to hear more about our thoughts and guidance in terms of Teams Connect and the ability to do sharing channels as that capability comes to market, make sure you hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel and you'll see our content about Teams Connect as we release it later this year. And in particular, how it applies to the 10 Ps that we talk a lot about in the book as well. The other thing I wanted to share with you before we get into the live read today, in the last couple of live reads, we've talked about the 10 Ps workbook. So at the end of each chapter, we say, go open up your 10 Ps workbook and go through all the different questions in the workbook to help start design the perfect team for you. So what I wanted to do is spend a couple of minutes just walking you through that workbook as well, so you can get a feel for what that actually looks like. So the way to get that workbook to kind of to follow the bouncing ball and design your team, which again is licensed through Creative Commons. You can use it in your organization as much as you want. Load it onto your intranet, supply it to your team owners or champions to help them have this design conversation around teamwork as well. The place to get it from is teamsbook.info, which is the page that I've got on the screen here. So teamsbook.info, the URL there. Now, if you wanted to find the 10 Ps workbook, again, if we just hit on this resources button just here at the top of the screen, and then about a little bit down this page, obviously read all that stuff, but this link just here, Adopt and Embrace Microsoft, Adopt and Embrace's 10 Ps of Microsoft Teams Design Workbook PDF. That document there is what I've got loaded here as a tab at the moment. So what this is basically a PDF which you can then take, load into your internet. I just looked at the screen there. I've screwed up the green screen today. My hair's going a bit crazy. Apologies for that. But you can use this this workbook to basically as a design tool or a design artifact or a workshop artifact that you can use with your team owners to help them create a really great team structure following the 10 Ps. Again, the license is there for you to use it. We're going through the 10 Ps in the book at the moment. So today, again, we'll be focusing on plugins and permissions. Those 10 Ps there. But you can see the other episodes of the live read, we've gone through those other principles so far. Gives you a little bit of introduction to the 10 Ps and what they mean at a high level. And then we get right into business about, how do you structure your team using the 10 Ps? And then step one, just like we talked about in the problem chapter a few weeks ago, what is a business problem or opportunity that you're focused on? Fill in the box. And then there's some kind of checks in here in terms of, what is it that you want to so checklists items in here to make sure we're on the right track, right? So is this problem one that is both logical and rational and one that everyone would understand? Obviously that helps us get buy-in. If it is, let's move to step two. If it's not, let's try and make sure we refine this problem in the first place to make sure we can create a really great, a team grounded in a really great problem to solve. Now, the advice we gave the other week is obviously trying to only solve one problem per team. So if you've got multiple problems that you're trying to solve, it might be a good decision point to break that into separate teams. Okay. Step two, what is the purpose? So you can see how what we've talked about in the recent live reads, what we talk about in the chapters, it just comes to life in the workbook itself. Okay, what is the purpose of coming together? Let's talk about that in this box. Now, if we had to summarize that purpose in 50 characters or less, what would it be? Because that's going to be the name of our team. So again, we've got a little box there to put a name of our team. I'm going to build that out as well. So again, throughout the workbook, we've got these little boxes here that you can just take your people through if you're designing, you're helping others in your organization to design the perfect team. Or if you want to design a perfect team for yourself, again, use this workbook. It's free. Just use it as much as possible if you want to as a resource inside your organization. Don't reinvent the wheel. And hopefully this can create some really great, well-designed teams for your people as well. What I'll quickly do is just scroll through to the two that we're talking about today, because we're really getting into the forming your team kind of part at the moment. So we talk about principles today, and we'll talk about plugins today as well. And I'm trying to think, did we actually talk about principles last week or not? I'm pretty sure we just did priorities. Yeah, people and priorities. So we must be on to principles. So we'll talk about forming your team. So what principles do we agree to follow? These are basically the expectations that we agree to in terms of the way that we work together in the team, and some really important decisions that you need to make when you create the team in terms of, what the role the general channel plays, how we're going to use the mentions and all that kind of stuff, webcams on and off, all those kinds of things. And then we'll talk about plugins as well. This week, talk about tabs and connectors and other bits and pieces that help us add more functionality to the team as well. So they're the two things we'll talk about today. Again, if you've got any questions as we go through the live read, please feel free to throw them into the chat, and I'll see if I can pick them up as we go through the conversation. But with that, if there's no other questions I could kick off with, which it doesn't look like there are at the moment, I'm going to find the page in the book. And I thought I had this all lined up. All right, I was trying to make sure. I'm 100% sure we didn't talk about principles last week, but it might come back to my memory if I start talking about it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we didn't. So let's start with the principles chapter, and we can go through that. Again, if you want the high quality polished version of this live read without me forgetting which chapter I'm up to, obviously go to audible.com, listen to the audiobook there, or grab a copy of Teams book and read it yourself at teamsbook.info. You can buy them online at that store that I just talked about there, or any good book retailers that you're interested in. So let's get into it. Principles. All right. Henry Ford once said, "Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success." In this book, we provide a framework for how you can be successful in working together. After all, we doubt that you have worked in successful teams in your work. So let me start this again. After all, we don't doubt that you have worked in successful teams in your work or with your interests outside of work. But have you worked in a team that had to plan, coordinate, manage internal and external customers, stakeholders, and team members across different time zones and geographical locations, and use a multitude of different software programs, tools, and technology that happen to be enterprise systems? The answer is likely to be no, which is why you're probably relying on email as your main communication method in this context. Successful teams require something more than just the tools. Sure, tools help with communication, but good teams also need a set of principles to underpin not only how they work, but why they work in this way. Jürgen Appello, who writes about agile teams, defined principles as different to team values, saying that with team principles, you describe the concrete focus and guideposts for your team. Principles are not the same thing as values. With team values, you describe the non-negotiable axiomatic truths of your team. In this chapter, we will provide you with these guideposts that you will need to consider with your team. These will provide your team with a way to ensure that they consistently align to what you want to achieve. Having these principles discussed, defined, and written down will ensure that everyone knows the rules of engagement and all parties have an equal voice in determining how they will work together, how information is shared, how conflict and problems are resolved, and how they will capture key lessons. Team principles will ensure that your team operates from a place of mutual trust and respect, which will drive participation and ultimately performance. And this is a really important kind of topic to talk about, and it's probably loosely, if you roll out teams without much thought, it's probably the one area that not much thought is actually put into, and it's one of those really, really important parts. As we form a team, as we bring people together to start to work in this new space that we're creating, making sure we put in place that bumper bowling to make sure they understand the way that we want them to engage with each other, the kinds of expectations that we have on each other. These are the make or break things that really have an impact on the success or otherwise of your team and the collaboration outcomes that you expect to get in that team as well. This is why this chapter is just one of those really important ones that we need to consider, both as an individual, but also as a team owner or as a group of people working in a team. So where do you start? The best starting place to determine your principles is to ask the team the following questions and have a deep discussion around how they would like to operate. The questions are: how will we communicate? How will we collaborate? How will we resolve issues and concerns? Within each of the questions, you'll need to consider the details of how participants will write a post in the Teams channel every day. However, that may not be adequate as it doesn't consider the context of the work. Effective communication is specific. That is, what will you write? When will you write it? Is an emoji considered a response? Do you want a reaction or a long-form response? Also, the above statement does not take into account the multitude of ways that communication can happen in Teams beyond text. For example, responses can be different forms such as video, graphics, links to other Microsoft applications, and programs like SharePoint, GIFs, and many more. Accordingly, it is evident that determining the principles of how your team communicates, collaborates, and resolves conflict is critical. It will not only mean a change in the habits and behavior of your team members, but may also require them to break out of their comfort zone, where their work will be in the open to their colleagues for comment, feedback, and discussion. Similarly, their work is now presented in forms other than text, such as video. This means they will have a variety of forms of expression that are different to those they've had in the past. The medium has changed from written to visual communication. This is something that some of your team members may struggle with initially, especially if they're not used to this way of communicating and collaborating. Therefore, having a set of principles by which you operate and engage with each other in the team is important, as it takes a new commitment to how work is done and requires everyone's involvement. And it's interesting, there's a few customer examples I can think of where members of the workforce have really struggled with the professionalism or otherwise of using emojis or GIFs as a response in a business context. And by setting these principles and setting these shared expectations, you can help overcome some of those challenges that you come across in terms of people not being confident using these new ways to communicate. But making sure everyone understands it's safe, it's okay. It helps us, build a bit more trust with each other because we're not kind of stifling ourselves with business speak or other things. It's kind of a more real and emotional reaction to some of these things, and the way that GIFs and other reactions that you have within teams can help create that bond. So it's a really important conversation to have to make sure that everyone feels like they're included and actually can effectively contribute in a way that isn't necessarily what they're used to in the past. So how will we communicate and collaborate? The first question to ask and determine as a team is how you will communicate and collaborate. You will need to decide that Microsoft Teams will now be the only option used to share information, make decisions, and capture team project files, documents, and presentations. It will be difficult to work as a cohesive team if some members insist on continuing to use email. Therefore, take note of those who prefer to stay with email and explore the reasons for its continued use. In our experience, reluctance to embrace new technology, such as Microsoft Teams, is because they need additional support, guidance, or coaching to use a new system or technology. Let's not forget that email has been around since the 1970s and in popular usage in workplaces since the 1990s. It's what many people have used for their entire work lives. One other quick thing here is that the goal of eliminating email 100% is pretty much non-existent or not possible. Even if you're really deep into your Teams usage, using Teams really well to chat, communicate, collaborate, coordinate, inside your organization, you're always going to have stakeholders you need to work with that will prefer email, or that cross-organizational collaboration isn't quite as strong as your internal collaboration. So email is always going to have a role to play. But being really clear about how you want to engage as a team, as a group, and the role that email plays in that collaboration or coordination exercise, that's what we're talking about here, being really clear about that. And if we can remove the reliance on email for that part of our work, then chances are your inbox is going to be 75% cleaner. Not as much noise in it as what you had before. So you can actually focus on some of that external stuff with a bit more of your discretionary energy as well, which is pretty cool. Resistant people may be receptive to the idea of open communication and collaboration or reducing their email inbox, but fearful of changing a habit. It's also possible that changing the systems they've set up to manage their inbox may override their need to participate in and contribute to Microsoft Teams. We recently worked with a client who we'll call Jan. Jan was an administrative assistant and a long-time employee of a financial services company. Over the years of working in the company, Jan had developed an extensive set of manual and paper-based processes around travel authorizations and staff requests for travel, all conducted through email. She was placed in a Microsoft Teams team as a team member and, at the outset, seemed excited to be involved, if not daunted by the online environment, and interested in learning a new program that would help her manage and coordinate her work. However, when she realized that the processes that she had been doing through, let me get this sentence right. I think it's one of those sentences where I read it in the audiobook reading as well, and I think we got the words wrong, but let me try it again. However, when she realized that the processes that she had been doing through these years had to change and she was now required to complete these tasks within teams, her demeanor changed. Suddenly, she became anxious that she would lose track of her requests, that she wouldn't be able to know the progress of her work, and that she couldn't trust that people would follow her procedure. Jen also questioned the openness and transparency of Microsoft Teams, fearing that it was akin to losing privacy and control of her work. And this is a really interesting one, the fear of loss of control and in the way that you do things. And we've seen this happen numerous times in our customer conversations as well. And it really comes from a place of comfort and confidence that people have in the status quo, as well as the recognition that in many organizations, information still is power, and being able to hold on to information and be in control of that information gives you power or prestige in that organization. And I guess the whole idea of teams and open and transparent communication is taking that power away from individuals and giving that power to the collective, to the group. So just in interesting ways that this human psychology comes into play here a little bit. As a result, she sought permission from her manager to continue using her manual systems through email. Her team acknowledged that she was feeling lost, not only about the process change, but also how this change would impact the work she'd been doing for many years. Her team rallied around her and provided her with additional coaching and desk support. They showed her how they could use Microsoft Teams to streamline her work step by step. The additional coaching provided Jan with the opportunity to build trust with Microsoft Teams and her team members and contribute to her team effectively. In time, Jan realized that the introduction of Microsoft Teams was not due to her company's management or her team taking personal aim at her work. Instead, it was to alleviate tedious tasks that she could focus so that she could focus on providing more value through her ideas and insights into the team. At first, Microsoft Teams can be seen as an addition to every other work system that you have, not as a replacement. In the example above, Jan misunderstood the intent of Microsoft Teams as being the platform that replaces email, not another system to use for that one project she was assigned. This is where you and your team will need to ensure that all members are aware of these distinct differences and are supported in their use and application. Let's look at some ways you can decide how you will communicate. Types of posts and conversations. You can discuss the types of conversations and posts you will all contribute to and create a principle around these. For example, you may decide that your team will avoid posting in the general channel and reserve this only for communications about how you work together as a team. Instead, new channels of conversations can be created around specific themes. In this way, conversations are focused in the correct channel rather than sprawled across the general channel. So ask your team, what are the types of conversations and posts we can write and share? How will the general channel be used? What are the main topics of conversations or themes that this team will use so that we can align channels with these? How will we edit and annotate the posts so they don't get lost in the threads? How can we ensure that the right people are added or mentioned in conversations so that they need to be a part of? How can we ensure conversations continue as threads, replying to posts as opposed to starting new conversations? How can we ensure that our replies, posts, and comments always add value? That is, they're educational, insightful, thoughtful, and relevant to the discussion. And the second last point, there's an interesting one. How can we ensure conversations continue as threads, replying to posts as opposed to starting new conversations? So back when we wrote the book, 14, 15 months ago, this was a problem that was quite common when people were using conversations in Teams, where you might have someone replying to a conversation that exists there, but it actually started a new thread of conversation completely. And what it boiled down to was a little bit of the user interface design that was in Microsoft Teams made it really confusing in terms of how you would, where's the right point to actually reply to a thread. So you had two boxes you could type into. One looked like you were replying to the thread, but actually started a new thread of conversation itself. So what Microsoft have done, I put a big purple button there, which is basically new message or new conversation. So it stops people from actively creating that new thread every time they think they're replying to a message. So there's a good change in the product that helps solve that problem. Probably not as relevant as a principle we need to think about now, but still an important conversation to have. If we're going to have a conversation about a topic, or there's a conversation that exists about a topic, it's better to reply to that thread so you have that stream of consciousness all in the one spot versus creating a new conversation about the same topic at a different time. When writing this book, the Adopt and Embrace team used various channels for the conversations around how we were planning, writing, and editing the manuscript, as shown in the screenshot. The channels were based around the themes of the book. We used a general channel for team announcements. The working manuscript channel housed all of our conversations about our individual work for each chapter, while the coaching review channel held conversations with our book coach regarding the editing, proofing, and review of our drafts. You can see that we also captured information regarding screenshots and research in one place so that we could easily find them. Finally, beta reader and book marketing channels contained conversations with external members of our organization who could also contribute their feedback. In your team, use of one-on-one chat for back channel conversations. In your team, discuss how you see one-to-one conversations happening. For example, you may decide that any conversation regarding a task between two individuals pertaining to the project is made open and placed in the appropriate channel, rather than using the more private one-on-one chat. This way, the work can be found by others who need it. This is particularly useful where one of the team is absent or to bring a new team member up to speed. Therefore, direct messaging to others is reserved only for private and confidential matters. So ask your team, how will we use chat? And when is a chat message deemed information that should be shared to the Teams channel for everyone's information? And just to be clear there, when you talk about chat, we're talking about that one-on-one chat. If you click on the chat button within Microsoft Teams to have a chat with your manager directly or with a peer directly. We talk about conversations. That's what we're talking about with that happen in a team, in a channel within a team. You have a conversation in there. So kind of this distinction between the two. Use of mentions and notifications. Microsoft Teams allow you to set up your teams and channels any way you like. However, there's also an area in settings where you can individualize your team's experience. Your team may need guidance to set this up because we all work differently. We all want to create an experience of how we enter and use Teams so it integrates with our own way of working and flows. For example, some team members may not like to have notifications emailed to them, so they have the flexibility to personalize the experience by turning these off. Similarly, some people like to have some notifications turned off so they're only notified for certain critical conversations they're following. During your team discussion to set up principles, discuss how you can set up notifications too. Initially, you may decide to have notifications turned on so it triggers an action, like a behavior for your team member to remember to use Microsoft Teams for their work. Over time, as your team members become more comfortable using settings, they may alter them to suit their new workflow. Similarly, you may need to educate your team about the use of the @ symbol or the mention. This symbol is used when you want to mention someone. Think of it as a prompt, like calling someone's name across a crowded room, where you direct someone's attention to the conversation. Mentioning a person, the whole channel, or the whole team in Microsoft Teams can be powerful if used well, as it will, by default, notify the person or people you mention that they need to look at the message. If it is overused, however, the power of a mention disappears quickly. If I'm getting notified 37 times a day just because someone is replying to me, I'm more likely to ignore a mention as opposed to when I'm mentioned twice in a day, and only when someone is asking me to take an action. Our rule of thumb, as mentioned in part 1, is that you only mention someone in a post if you want them to do something explicitly based on that message. Don't just mention them if you want them to read it as an FYI, because if you do that, everyone will be overwhelmed with notifications in no time. And if there's one thing you take away from reading our book, listening to the live reads, this is the one thing to take away. If you can build a culture where people are only mentioning people in conversations when there is a direct action that needs to take place or a direct response that is required, and maybe some time-bound response to it, that's going to solve 95% of your challenges of people feeling overwhelmed with communication and notifications that come out of Microsoft Teams. We need to move to a culture where it's not you will read the message when I tell you to read it. It's you will read the messages at a time that suits you to keep up with the general conversations and the general flow of information in the organization. Make it work for you and your work styles and your work day. And I'm only going to interrupt that work style or work day when there's a time-bound sensitive need for you to take some action. So I can draw your attention to that to make sure you can then prioritize that based on the other work that you have. So yeah, just trying to create that culture where mentions are only used for those specific examples where an action is required. Will serve you really well as an individual, as a team owner, as an organization. So ask your team, does everyone know how to use mentions? What are the rules of use for mentions in conversations and teams? How can people set up their notifications? Do you want to encourage people to set up for the purpose of the team or in their own preferred way? And where will critical and important announcements be made so that people can see these despite having notifications turned off? When to start new conversations and when to continue conversations. Microsoft Teams enables you to provide a rich experience of communication and collaboration compared to email. In an email, you can attach a file, provide some context about the file, and send it through to your recipient. Once they receive it, they can add another file, provide additional context, and send it on. However, in little time, this process results in a long email thread which is unwieldy as it is unsearchable, creating frustration. By comparison, in Microsoft Teams, you upload a file in a channel and have all the conversations centered around that file in its own conversation space. It reduces the dreaded email trees and allows everyone to have the same view of the file and the conversations around it. Another benefit is that Microsoft Teams allows for separate conversations to happen within channels, which email cannot do. This way, important information is easily accessible and isn't lost in long threads, which improves staff productivity. Having conversations around documents in Microsoft Teams is something new to many people, and we encourage you to discuss how new conversations are added to the channel. Rather than start a new conversation, your team needs to learn a new behavior of searching to see if that conversation has already happened, so they can continue the thread of conversation rather than start a new conversation, if applicable. To do this, type the conversation topic in the search bar. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you can start a new, if you don't find what you're looking for, you can start a new conversation. And just those of you who haven't used the search bar much at all, it's pretty powerful within Microsoft Teams. It's just at the very top of your Microsoft Teams window. Sometimes people miss it because it kind of looks like it's just blurring into the menus and the kind of the bar at the top of the screen. But you've got a big text box at the top of the Microsoft Teams application where you can do your searches in there. In the screenshot below, I'm searching for anything with the word chapters in it. Teams shows me all the messages where the word chapters is located. I can filter these further if I need to. Once I find what I'm looking for, then I'm able to go directly to that conversation. If I cannot find the specific conversation I'm looking for, or if the search does not yield any results, I can start a new thread. This process is a great way to ensure that conversations are grouped and themed and don't lead to separate and disparate threads that are not connected or linked. It also keeps the channel tidy. Ask your team, is your team familiar with the search function? What are the rules around starting new conversations versus replying to conversations? Is the team aware of how to create links to tabs, documents, or files? Providing context for conversations. Once your team starts using Microsoft Teams, the conversations will build over time and may start to look disordered. For some, this is going to take a while to get used to, but in our experience, we have noticed that people soon start to follow what others are doing, especially if information is presented in a way that helps them to quickly find what they're looking for. One of the ways to do this is to encourage your team members to provide context for their conversations. Context refers to the provision of additional or supporting information that enables someone else to achieve an outcome more quickly. This could mean providing a direct link to a specific document in a conversation, mentioning the people who need to take action in a conversation, or linking the conversation to a previous conversation in Teams. This minimizes the time people need to search for information or context. That way, you're cross-referencing and linking together disparate pieces of information in Microsoft Teams into one conversation. It is not only a time saver, but it also shows respect for the person reading it, because you're providing them with all the information they need without them having to backtrack and glean the information from multiple conversation threads. Therefore, consider making one of your principles that when your team members contribute to the conversation, they provide cross-referencing or links to supporting documents, files, and conversations for more context. And this idea here of adding that additional context, those additional links or to files or other conversations that you had, is so important and so valuable when it comes to looking back at previous conversations in the past. I had a few examples recently within our business where we've gone back to conversations that we were having in 2017 within Microsoft Teams in a particular channel. And because we had the links to the documents that we were talking about in that conversation thread, we're able to quickly connect the dots between the conversation and the files that we were working with at that time to be able to kind of take some of the IP we had back then and reuse it for another purpose. So this context, it's not just from making it easy to navigate and see what's going on, but it's really a knowledge management outcome we're trying to achieve here. Is how do we make sure that the conversations and the knowledge captured in the conversation is tied back to what we've codified in a Word document or other resource that we might have referenced in the conversation as well. So ask your team, do we know how to create links to files, documents and tabs in Microsoft Teams, and how will we cross-reference and link to files, documents, and tabs to create context around conversations in Microsoft Teams? Providing status updates. A key function of any team is to provide status updates, and these can occur in several ways. There is no right or wrong way to do this, nor is there a best practice, as these are indicative of how your team prefers to do this. At Adopt and Embrace, we have both external Microsoft Teams, where we directly collaborate with our customers. For example, the planning, coordination, and writing of this book was conducted entirely in Teams, as well as internal teams, where together with our peers, we discuss and plan customer work. As we work on projects where our colleagues rely on information, we have decided that every time we undertake work at a client site, we provide a status update in the relevant channel. This way, other team members can see the work we have completed, what issues were highlighted, and what work remains to be done. It allows people to get a quick snapshot of what transpired. Details of the project are captured in the relevant channel with appropriate links for further information. Consider how your team can provide status updates and what these may look like. Other teams we have seen have created a specific channel for status updates where every member can contribute their reports. Others prefer a more formalized structure to their status updates for team meetings, with agenda and briefing points in, for example, OneNote notebooks that are linked into conversations in Teams. Ultimately, the different ways to provide status reports are unending. However, this principle of coordinating your teamwork, you need to discuss and decide on this as a team. With Microsoft Teams, you have a variety of ways to do this, so why not be creative? Here's your opportunity to make status reports something more memorable, something that people want to provide. Ask your team, how will we provide status updates to other team members and those people outside of our team who may need to know the status of our project? And we've seen some really interesting uses, status reporting use cases emerge recently, and the value and the power of tabs to achieve that. We'll talk about tabs in a later chapter in terms of plugins that you can add into a team. But if you've got centralized reporting or dashboards about project status or health, just being able to tab those existing reports into a team, so you can see that they're in the space that you're doing the work. Or using SharePoint pages, an example, to give status updates across a number of different teams. So you have one location where that report is updated and maintained, but you kind of frame it in with a tab to all the other teams that it's relevant to. So some really interesting ways you can do it once and do it well across multiple collaboration spaces as well, without having to upload a file into each team and do it that way. Sending emails to channels. Earlier we mentioned that using Microsoft Teams will involve a new behavior for some of your team. The biggest hurdle you will face is weaning team members off email and moving their work to Teams. There are many articles and posts online claiming the demise and death of email. However, to date, this has not been the case. Although we cannot foresee the future, what we have seen is with companies with which we work is that upon the introduction of Microsoft Teams into the workplace, I just muted myself with my foot on the thing, sorry. Let me go back to that part. There are many articles and posts online claiming the demise and death of email. However, to date, that has not been the case. Although we cannot foresee the future, what we have seen is that companies with which we work is that upon introduction to Microsoft Teams into the workplace, the volume of emails reduced. However, email doesn't disappear entirely. And that's what we talked about a bit earlier in the live read. Don't go into this with an expectation of getting rid of email completely. It's not possible. But when it comes to your internal email volume in particular, you can significantly reduce that as well, particularly if you're bundling Teams, or kind of think about Teams in the context of other platforms you might have like Yammer or Workplace Facebook or by Facebook and things like that. We have a community where conversations can occur and teams where teamwork is really occurring. So that is, there'll be times when people default to sending email about their team project. They may still have external parties or stakeholders who are not team members or privy to the conversations in the channel. Email, in this case, is still a viable form of communication, especially if it's used one-to-one. In these situations, it's important that as a team, you clarify how people will use email and encourage the sharing of that email back into the team channels of conversation. Therefore, a principle you may decide on as a team is one for transparent work that involves sending all emails related to team projects into the team. Demonstrate that every team's channel has a specific email address and encourage people to add this email address as a CC when they're sending out emails to customers or stakeholders. A copy of this email will then be sent to the appropriate team's channel so that everyone on the team can see it has been sent. Now, for those of you who haven't used the Teams capability before to send an email to a channel, just go to the channel, pick one of the channels that you have in front of you in Teams right now. If you click on the 3 dots beside the channel name, the ellipsis, then in that little pop-up menu that appears, you'll see a get email address for channel or something similar to that. So all you need to do is once you click that, is just copy that email address, and then you can put it into your to field if you're forwarding an email into the team, or in a CC or a BCC if you wanted to copy a response in and have that appear in the team as well. What that does do is it puts that email, and within the next 5 or 10 seconds, it'll appear in the conversation in that channel, in that team. The content of the email will appear as a post, just like anything else, but it'll have a via email kind of tag at the top of it, so you know it came via email. What it'll also do, which is quite interesting and useful in some use cases, is if you have an attachment on that email, when you forward it to that email address, it'll automatically put that attachment into the file storage behind that team, so into the SharePoint document library that we've got that keeps all the files for that team together. So if you're trying to think of processes where you need to work with attachments or files and get them into a central location quickly, like just emailing the email to the team might be a great way to do that as well. So have a play around with emailing things to your team. One thing I would say is if you're going to do it, I wouldn't send every email about every possible thing into the conversation. You're just going to overwhelm people with that overwhelm we have in our inboxes already today. So pick and choose the meaningful emails that have a material impact on your project or the initiative or the conversation that you're having within the team. So ask your team, how will we ensure that all emails related to the project are redirected back to the relevant team channel for everyone to view and comment on? Is there anyone outside of our team who needs to have access to this response on email and access to the team resources to reduce use of email to them? Are the above people internal or external to our organization, as you may have different rules for team members who are not employees? Just one final comment on this as well. With what we talked about at the start of the live read today, the announcements from Microsoft Ignite this week around Microsoft Teams Connect and the ability to share a channel, not just share a team with someone. I think it's going to change some of the ways that many people have been thinking about using email and channels generally as well. So I think there's probably a little bit more discussion and thinking we all need to do here in terms of the role of channels and the role of emails and whether or not it's just easier to just bring that external party into that channel now as opposed to having them all that communication happening separately in an email, particularly in those use cases where it wasn't enough to go and create a separate team for the engagement in that particular external party that you're working with. All right, let's get into video recordings of team meetings. Now, this is one area that's changing since we wrote the book as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit in this. So let's face it, managing relationships and therefore meetings are part of life. People who work together will need to meet in person or online in order to plan, coordinate, and manage their team's project. Lowercase t in that case. Where meetings in Microsoft Teams differ is how they can be conducted. That is, they can be conducted synchronously, where participants communicate in real time. And if you think about synchronously, for those of you that are on the live stream at the moment, this is a synchronous kind of conversation that we're having. You can engage in the chat and I'll respond to it, that kind of thing, very synchronous experience. Or it can be asynchronous, where participants communicate over a period. And an example of asynchronous would be if you're watching the replay of this live read and you engage in the comments after the fact, and like we can kind of engage in the backwards and forwards through the comments over time as well. This means that everyone can participate and contribute to the meeting experience regardless of whether they are there in person or not. This is achieved using the recording feature, which enables the meeting to be recorded and reviewed later. For example, a team member who is ill on the day of a team meeting can instead watch the recording of the meeting so that he or she can access the actions discussed, that he or she is across the actions discussed. Similarly, if your colleague is overseas and the time zone of your meeting does not suit their time, they can watch it at a more suitable time. The recording builds inclusivity into your team, making geographical and time limitations cease to be obstacles. Recording meetings is not a new concept. People have been recording meetings through note-taking and voice recorders for years. The only difference is now that this function is available to everyone at the click of a button. Recording meetings may not sit well with some of your team members, and this is where you need to discuss how this will happen. A way to consider recording is to have the meeting facilitator disclose to the participants that the meeting will be recorded. If someone has an issue with the meetings being recorded, then you can explore the objection and find the reasons why. You may decide that in that instance that the meeting will not be recorded, which is fine. In our experience, many people overcome their initial anxiety when they know how the recordings will be used and where they'll be saved or where they'll be shared. You may decide, however, that not all team meetings need to be recorded, and that's okay too. By being transparent about the fact that the team meeting is being recorded and then automatically transferred into the appropriate channel in Microsoft Teams, everyone is included in the dialogue. The days of having to schedule an appropriate time when everyone is there or seeking out meeting minutes or information about what was discussed in the team meetings are now gone. So ask your team, how will we record meetings? Does everyone approve of using and recording meetings for the team? And if not, how will we resolve any objections? Particularly around the meeting recordings. So within Adopt and Embrace, we have a culture of recording most of our meetings. And there's a number of reasons why we do this. So the first one is because we really believe in asynchronous work as much as possible, and not trying to tie everyone to synchronous moments in their workday where they have to drop everything and join a meeting or things like that. We actually try and make meetings as as optional as possible. So if people are having a conversation synchronously and they want to engage others in the organization, we recommend to record the meeting so people can have the opportunity to watch the replay of that conversation and then provide their commentary via a reply to the thread that's happening in Teams as well. And that just allows people a bit more control over the day, a bit more focus, time blocked out to focus on the things that are important to them, but then the opportunity to engage in a face-to-face via video conversation if they want to as well. So we find that culture is really liberating in terms of getting some of your control of your workday back, which is great. Allows people to do their work. It also means people don't miss out on things that are happening if they don't want to miss out on them. We also we record when we're working with customers, and we absolutely have this conversation with customers right at the start and say, well, is it okay if we record our project kickoff meeting with you? Because a project kickoff is exactly that point of time where you're setting those shared expectations with an external party outside of your organization. And by recording that kickoff conversation, not only it allows us to see how we set those expectations right at the start, but if we have new team members join that project or new people join that team in the future, on the customer side too, we can point them to this kickoff conversation that we had where we introduced each other, agreed on what success looked like, and agreed to principles of how we want to work together. So these recordings can actually become really useful project management artifacts as well in the way that you do things. Now, again, we don't record every possible conversation. We don't record every possible meeting that occurs. It's the key ones that we think where people would like to have a voice or like to have awareness of what's going on, and we make them available to the team. The interesting thing that's happened since we wrote the book, particularly around meeting recording, so when we wrote the book, the recording of the meeting would actually live in a service called Microsoft Stream that many of you may have heard of. It's basically your corporate YouTube, if you think of it that way. Recently, over the past few months, Microsoft have made the announcements that those meeting recordings are now going to end up in the SharePoint site behind the team, which helps with a few different things in terms of keeping knowledge and information together in one spot, files, video recordings, things like that, which I think is valuable. Helps better. It's better in terms of having better information governance controls and governing how information is retained and stored and shared in the organization as well. Because meeting recordings obviously are a key record that would be part of that as well. So there's some changes there afoot. So if you wanted to have a conversation around how that would impact your team and the way you want to use meeting recordings, I'd recommend having a chat with your internal IT folk or the product owner of Office 365 in your organization as well, and see what their thoughts are on that as well. All right, following channel conversations. One of the most critical aspects of teamwork is ensuring that your team members have the right information at the right time in order to make decisions that will affect or impact the project. However, there's only so much you can do. As a team leader, you're responsible for ensuring that your staff keep up with information so they can make the most informed decisions. It'll allow you to it'll be your responsibility to provide support and guidance if any of your team members struggle with this responsibility. Initially, until your team gets used to a new way of working, they may find it overwhelming. When they see how many teams they've been assigned to, they may worry about how to keep up with the conversations in those teams. There are ways to manage this information overwhelm, such as demonstrating how team members can show or hide channels within teams and set their notifications accordingly. Alternatively, you can show them that not all teams are active. If there are teams in which they do not play an active role, these teams can be hidden from view. Show your team how they can reorder the teams by dragging and dropping them up and down their list to create some personal order in the vertical navigation bar. And just pause there for a second. There's one thing a lot of people don't realize with Microsoft Teams. You've got your list of teams down that left-hand side there. By default, they'll just come into the order of when they're created, essentially. But you have the ability with your mouse just to drag and drop those teams up and down to reorder those teams as you want. So if you've got 3 or 4 teams, probably doesn't matter all that much because they're all just kind of there at the top of the page. If you're like me and you're a member of over 100 teams, you want to reprioritize the focus you apply to those teams every day. So you'll be dragging and dropping those up and down depending on what's your focus for that particular week, as an example. One thing that we didn't include in the book, because it was a new feature that was released after we published the book, was the ability to pin a channel. And I think that's really important to talk about here as well. So if you have a really important channel within a team that you're quite active in at the moment, if you can hit the 3 ellipses, the 3 dots beside the name, the ellipsis, and click on that and say pin this channel, it'll pin that channel to the very top of that list that you have there. So you might have 2 or 3 channels across 2 or 3 teams that you work in that are really important. You can just have those 3 at the top of the list, your 3 favorites that you're focusing on, and then the rest of the teams can just be below that. So you're making sure that people are aware that they can manage what that looks like. Will help with managing that overwhelm as well. Right, I'm trying to think, I just lost my spot in the page. Where's Mitch? I'll tell you in review. Okay, here we go, found it. Also, show team members some tips such as saving conversations or bookmarking them so they can be easily found. Alternatively, and or additionally, they can mark some conversations as unread so they become bolded and they can therefore be found more easily, as shown below. Saved bookmarks are then collated in the profile setting, which is under the title saved. So again, if you have a bookmarked post in Teams, if you've tried it, there's a little bookmark button you can press beside each post. And if you want to access those things, you just click on your face in the top right-hand corner, and that brings up a menu that shows you where you can click find all your saved posts that are there. Once again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, nor is there a best practice use of conventions around following and notifying. This convention can only be obtained after using Microsoft Teams for a while and then deciding on an individual's most preferred way to work. As a start, however, it's wise to encourage team members to follow and create notifications for channels of conversations that are relevant for them and hide any teams or channels that are not relevant to them. Ask your team, how will we ensure we follow the right conversations and channels? How can we clear up the visual interface of our desktop so we can do our best work without distractions and clutter on the screen? Team channel conventions. We have discussed different aspects to creating your team's principles and how they relate to helping the individual to change their behavior so that they can contribute to and participate in conversations within Teams channels rather than emails. That is, they may be communicating with people in their team who have vested interest in a specific channel, but what are the behaviors when communications need to be sent to the entire team? As mentioned previously in this book, we've all been on the receiving end of an email accidentally sent to everyone in the organization. You may have been the person who sent such an email. The dreaded reply all email creates a long email thread that inevitably clogs up everyone's inbox. People know that you must never reply all to emails or risk everyone's ire. In Microsoft Teams, although this will not happen to such an extent, it is unlikely that an entire organization will be in one team unless you've set up an organization-wide team, which is a whole other discussion that we could talk about another time, whether it's worthwhile doing that or not. But it may still happen. However, the numbers would be reduced to only the members of that team. Therefore, you may want to create some principles around restricting the use of mentions like at team or at channel name in conversations unless it's necessary. The alternative is to use a general tab, as mentioned earlier, for any team-wide communications or general announcements. Reserve the mention for specific people instead. Ask your team, how will we use the mention convention? Who needs to have access to our team's channels? And what are those people inside or outside of our team and our organization? Start and stop behaviors. When we have come to the point of looking at the new set of behaviors that your team will be asked to demonstrate, sorry, let me get this right. My words aren't coming out properly today. When we have now come to the point of looking at the new set of behaviors that your team will be asked to demonstrate. By now, asking the questions outlined above, your team will notice a need to flip their thinking and look at how their own workplace behaviors around teamwork and collaboration can be more open, inclusive, and supportive. You need to decide what old behaviors will be stopped and what new behaviors need to start. In our experience, it's worthwhile to prioritize some time to facilitate this and capture what everyone in your team thinks. They may already have a starting point, including that today you stop using email for the project, stop sending emails with attachments, stop uploading a file without linking it into a conversation. And you may have some behaviors you want to start, like start setting up your profile and notifications, start using Microsoft Teams and channels, start mentioning someone who needs to take action, start replying to or commenting on posts where people have something of value to add, start showing channels of interest to your work and hiding those that don't. So have a think about what are some of the start and stop behaviors around the use of Microsoft Teams that we can start with today. Resolving problems, issues, and conflict. In every team, you're going to have various degrees of conflict, problems, and issues that need to be solved. For your team to succeed, you will need to decide on principles for resolving problems and conflicts that may arise. One consideration is that everyone will be able to participate in the resolution of the problem if it's within the Teams channel or the conversation. This means that highlighted issues can be resolved quickly through collaborative discussion and feedback. The value of sharing issues and problems openly in the Teams channel is that everyone has an opportunity to contribute to a solution together. Ideas for how resolution may occur can be discussed and debated without anyone feeling that they may be at fault. Airing issues early in the Teams channel can also prevent issues from escalating further. Ask your team, how will we resolve any problems, issues, or conflicts? How can we encourage people to share those openly in our team? What can we do if issues aren't resolved to a satisfactory level of every team member? One of the easiest and best ways I've seen applied this in a team structure is a few teams I've worked with have set up a channel called What is Broken. And it's basically a safe space where people can just put whatever is broken, whatever issues, risks, hazards, challenges to the project. It's one place where we encourage that feedback to occur. And that's the place where then the resolution to some of these challenges or to teamwork or the project that you're working on can all happen in that one space. So the idea of creating a space which is where you can think about, reflect on how things are going, raise issues, challenges, and all that kind of stuff. It's a really great tactic you can use to bring your team together to solve those things as a collective group. All right, getting it all down in writing. Your team will have collated a lot of information in responding to the questions outlined above. At Adopt and Embrace, we use the Wiki tab in Microsoft Teams to capture the general team information about how that team will work together. A wiki is a simple page that you can use to structure information and allow others to update over time. Wikipedia is the most famous example of a wiki in action. We encourage you to build out the team principles into the wiki associated with your general channel and have everyone contribute their ideas to it. This way, this wiki can be used as an additional resource for those members who join the team later and need to get up to speed. The wiki can be used as a team induction resource that steps new members through how to use the team and how members collaborate. It will save you time in collating resources, links, and tabs by having all those within the one collaborative page that can be continually updated as information changes and to which you can direct people so they understand the processes and principles in which your team works. It's a great time saver. And one thing I'd say about the wiki there, we've probably shifted our thoughts, and we probably were shifting our thoughts when we wrote that, to be honest, in terms of the role that wikis can play in a team. And for anyone who's used the wikis before in teams, you'll know there's probably a few disadvantages that come with wikis. So, for example, the contents aren't searchable. There's no way to do any kind of version control or version history of the wiki. If someone accidentally deletes the content, there's no way to get that back. There's downsides to using the wiki as a place to hold those principles together. So what we generally do now is we have a Word document, which is like a team charter, essentially, and it has some of these questions that we've just talked about, and we just articulate our responses to those things. And other things we haven't talked about today, like our expectations of responsiveness to the group. This is the kind of team where you need to be in here every day responding, or is it the kind of team you need to be in here every week responding, as an example. So using a Word template to do that allows us to have some structure to the conversations that we have there. Now, the option you've got here, if I kind of switch the camera as well, go to the over shoulder view, is that if you're using the 10Ps workbook to do this, your principles and how you document it could be just a screenshot of this step 5 slide, right? Which is, here are some of the principles we agree to in the box there. We've answered what expectations we're placing on each other for responsiveness. We've put that in that box there. here's what all these different things mean. So, how we're going to use a general channel, when's the right time to use a mention, what does a like mean? Does a like mean that I've read the message? Does a like mean I acknowledge the message? Does a like mean that I approve the message? When we're going to use things like important, where we're going to have the video on or off when our video calls, all that kind of stuff. We can kind of capture that on this one page here. So you can even have this just as a slide, which you add as a tab to your team to kind of have those principles together as well. And just something to consider when you're pulling all those your discussions and your decisions as a group together in one spot. So let's get to the summary. Team principles are the rules by which you and your members will engage within the team. Taking the time to discuss and determine your team principles and then writing them down will ensure that all members know the behaviours that they will display to make sure that the team operates in as smooth a manner as possible. Your team principles can change over time, so as a team owner, it is worthwhile revisiting the discussion with your team every 3 months to ensure that everyone is on the same page. As the team owner, it is up to you to make sure that everyone acts in accordance with the agreed principles as well. There's no need to publicly shame people. A simple one-on-one chat message or video call reminding them about how best to use the space is all that's usually needed. Communication and collaboration in Microsoft Teams is different to email because Teams opens doors to different forms of expression and makes work more visible and discoverable. This new way of working may make some of your team members anxious. However, we encourage coaching, guidance, and support along the way to ensure that every member plays their part in keeping the team together. Excellent. So let's look at the key takeaways for the chapter. So first of all, discuss, define, and write down the principles of how your team will contribute and participate. Determine your start and stop behaviours and commit to these for the life of the team. Encourage your team members to continue to support each other through new ways of working and new behaviours such as linking, video meetings, searching, and setting up their profile for notifications. Help each other set up for success. Then at the end of chapter checklist, agree to those principles that your team will embrace in the 10Bs workbook, which I just showed you previously. Document those principles in a wiki tab or another document, or take a screenshot of what's in the workbook, make it available to your team's general channel. And then obviously to do that, you need to fill in step 5 of the 10Ps workbook. So with that, we've gone for almost an hour, which I forgot that principles chapter is, I think, the longest chapter that we have in the book. So we might just do one chapter today. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in for those that joined live. Thank you for watching the replay for those that have joined the replay. For those of you who want to kind of follow on, next week we're talking about plugins. So we're looking at tabs and connectors and bots and other cool things like that. There's been a lot of new stuff that's come out in this space, particularly in the last 6 months around the role of things like Power Apps and Power Automate aligned with Microsoft Teams. So lots of additional content we can share next time in terms of how plugins make a difference. And then I think after plugins, we have the chapter which is permissions, and that's talking about security and other bits and pieces like that. And I think permissions chapter, again, with the new announcements around Microsoft Connect and being able to share channels, is probably additional information we can give in that permissions chapter too. So next week's live read is going to be a good one. Lots of new information in that one. If you want to catch the live read, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. If you liked the live read today, like the content, despite my poor green screen skills this week, I can tell that the book's not quite what it should look like, so I might need to fix it up for next week. My hair is a bit wishy-washy too. If you like the content though, make sure you give that like button a click as well, and hopefully get this content in front of more people that find it more valuable as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you next time when we do another live read of Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams. Chat to you then. Bye.